Son of the Storm Dragon by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and was reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest. Chapter 27, From One Trial to the Next. The air at the gates of Rimuru City was utterly still. The distant activity within the city, the rustle of leaves under the wind, even the anxious breathing of the two opposing forces present. It all faded into the profound, suffocating silence. The world had narrowed to the space between two rulers, two warriors, two swordsmen. A stage defined by the 20 paces separating them. On one end stood King Gazel Dwargo, a mountain of a man that looked like he had been carved from granite and steel. His stance was flawless, low, rooted to the earth, with every muscle coiled with the promise of explosive power. He held his sword firmly in his hands, his gaze focused on Rimuru, not with malice, but sharp, focused intent. On the other end, Rimuru stood in quiet opposition, his oppressive aura suppressed and replaced with the focused calm of a seasoned soldier. He could feel the anxiety of his subordinates behind him, but they knew better than to interfere at this point. He had accepted this challenge. Thus it was now between him and Gazel. Just as the two kings were about to move, a sudden breeze swept through the air. The air shimmered, and in a swirl of glowing green leaves, 3 figures materialized between the two forces, positioned to the side as impartial observers. Trainee was positioned at the forefront, flanked by her sisters Doris and Trya. The Dryads had arrived. Gazel and the Pegasus Knights were surprised by the arrival of the Dryads. But after a moment of thought, Gazel realized he should not be. If Rimuru's heritage was true, then of course he would be affiliated with the Dryads as well, who were said to be subordinates of the storm dragon Velredia. King Gazel of Dwargo and Lord Rimuru of Tempest, as caretakers of the forest, please allow my sisters and I to bear witness to this duel, Trainee said as she placed her hand on her chest and lowered her head respectfully. Rimuru nodded his head in acceptance. While Trainee was loyal, he trusted her to be impartial as well. He turned to Gazel. I am fine with it, what about you, King Gazel? Gazel nodded his head in acceptance. Yes, now that we have a witness to our duel, you and I can do battle. This duel will be a clash of blades between Rimuru Tempest and Gazel Dwargo. The winner will be decided when one combatant is disarmed, rendered unable to battle, or acknowledges defeat. No killing blows shall be struck. Do both of you accept these terms? Trainee asked as she stepped back, her voice carrying across the silent fields. Both kings nodded their heads as their focus returned to one another, their blades firmly in their hands. Then, begin! A moment of silence passed in the forest, with neither combatants moving and a gentle breeze passing through the air. And then, Gazel moved. With a burst of speed that was surprising for a man of his size, not to mention all that armor, Gazel vanished from his position and closed the gap between him and Rimuru, the ground he had been stepping on a moment ago shattering as he moved with the speed and force of a locomotive. His blade, held in a low guard, became a blur as he thrust it forward in a simple, brutally efficient thrust. Rimuru's emerald eyes slitted with focus at the approaching blade, the air itself seeming to part at its tip. He knew trying to meet that kind of force head-on would be devastating. Instead, he shifted his weight onto his back foot, his body moving fluidly. As the tip of Gazel's sword was inches from his chest, Rimuru's katana moved. Not to block, but in a sweeping circular parry. The flat of his blade met Gazel's, redirecting the overwhelming force rather than confronting it. Gazel's thrust was deflected harmlessly, but the king was not so easily countered. Gazel did not stumble. The moment his thrust was diverted, his body was already in motion for the next attack. His sword, still carrying that same momentum, whipped around in a powerful horizontal spin. Rimuru, who had just finished his motions, knew there was no way he could block or counter that with his blade. Instead of retreating, he swiftly dropped low, flowing under the deadly arc. The wind from the blade whistled over his head as he rose back up inside the king's guard. His own katana now a serpent ready to strike at the presented opening. Now, with mere inches separating the two of them, the true exchange began. The air filled with the music of steel against steel. It was a blindingly fast, intimate dance of death. As the two clashed, Rimuru noted the familiarity of Gazel's fighting style. It was no doubt the Haze style, just adapted to his larger and bulkier build. While the fundamentals were the same, Gazel's approach to the blade technique was that of an unyielding mountain. His blows were powerful, heavy, and economical, each one designed to crush and break. His defense was just as incredible, his form unyielding and his reaction speed surprising for a man of his size. Rimuru's application of the Haze style, in contrast, was like the wind. Fluid, unpredictable, and sharp. His movements were not as heavy, but he more than made up for it with speed and lethal precision. His blade was a flash of silver, looking for the smallest of openings to earn a decisive strike. It was a perfect contrast of technique. Gazel, the immovable fortress, and Rimuru, the unstoppable tempest. For a breathless minute, neither of the two could seem to get a definitive advantage over the other. Gazel's skill and experience kept him from getting overwhelmed, while Rimuru's sheer adaptability was closing the gap between them. The Pegasus Knights and Monsters of Tempest could only watch, utterly mesmerized by the masterclass swordsmanship they were witnessing. Another clash ended in a standstill, their blades locked in a shower of sparks, before the two of them leapt back, putting some distance between them. A heavy, charged silence fell between them, but this time it was different. It was not the quiet of assessment from earlier, but the tense anticipation of what was to come. Gazel's stern expression broke into a sharp, predatory grin. It was the look of a veteran warrior who had found a truly worthy opponent. A fine display, Rimuru. You have far exceeded my expectations, and this exchange has indeed shown me the kind of monster that you are. The Hero King's voice boomed, rich with approval. His expression then became serious once more as he held his blade upwards, bringing it close to his chest in a stance that was very familiar to Rimuru. Now we reach the climax of our battle. Show me your resolve as a king. Haze, thunder of heaven and earth. Gazel suddenly vanished with flash step, his presence completely concealed with formhide. But Rimuru was already familiar with this technique, having been on the receiving end of it from Hakuru many times, and having copied and learned to use it himself. Thus, he was prepared when Gazel suddenly appeared in front of him, his blade swinging from the ground up in a wide arc. This was the heaven portion. An ascending attack meant to strike the foe's weapon and create an opening for the follow-up attack. But rather than block the blade with his own, Rimuru leaned backward, watching as the tip of the blade ascended a few inches from the tip of his nose. Gazel vanished once more, but Rimuru already knew what was coming and moved to intercept. Twisting his body by the heel of his right foot, he positioned his blade diagonally above him with both hands just as Gazel appeared with his blade raised high. Gazel swung his blade in a heavy, downward cleave. The impact of the blade on his own was so heavy, Rimuru felt it rattle his bones, but the force was swiftly redirected by the position of his blade, forcing it to slide down with sparks of steel against steel flying between them, before it struck the ground beside him with the full force of the swing. A large cloud of dust erupted, engulfing the two of them. For a moment, the world beyond the dust particles ceased to exist. The Monsters of Tempest and Knights of Dworgen could only watch on anxiously as they held their breath. They could neither hear nor see anything. Then, from within the cloud, came a single sharp ring of metal followed by a soft grunt of surprise. Followed by absolute silence. A gentle gust of wind blew away the concealing dust. The scene it revealed, perfectly frozen in time, showed a clear and flawless victory. Gazel was still in the follow-through of his powerful, earth-shattering strike, his body slightly off balance, completely vulnerable and open. Standing inside his guard, so close their shoulders were almost touching, was Rimuru. The tip of his black katana rested firmly, yet gently, against the side of Gazel's thick neck. It did not move, remaining there as a clear sign of checkmate and victory. The entire field was locked into stunned silence. Then, with a swift and fluid motion, Rimuru pulled his blade back and sheathed it with a crisp, final click. The sound echoed in the silence of the entire area, a definitive end to the short yet thrilling duel between both kings. "I take it that marks the end of our duel, King Gazel?" Rimuru asked, his tone respectful and acknowledging, lacking the arrogance and pride one would expect from one who had bested such a seasoned warrior. For a moment, Gazel remained frozen, his body leaning forward with his blade held with both hands. He could still feel the phantom cold of the blade that had been pressed against his neck moments ago. Slowly, Gazel stood up and straightened his posture. He brought his own blade up before sheathing it. And then, the Hero King did something that astonished almost everyone present. Gazel suddenly threw his head back and let out a loud and boisterous laugh, one of genuine and unadulterated delight. "Indeed it does," Gazel roared, his grin splitting his face from ear to ear. "That was a splendid performance. Why, I haven't crossed swords with an opponent so skilled in centuries. And to think it would be one who not only wields the same sword technique, but whose technique rivals or perhaps exceeds my own. The battle has been concluded. The winner, Rimuru Tempest," Trainee declared with a smile as she gestured towards Rimuru. "As expected of Lord Rimuru," Cheyenne's voice declared first, a triumphant declaration of pride and adoration. Beside her, Benimaru's posture seemed to relax. The monsters of Tempest let out a collective roar and cheer of victory, a wave of joy and pride filling their ranks. On the opposing end, the Pegasus Knights were surprised to see their king bested in a test of swordsmanship. But witnessing their king's approval and respect of his adversary, they accepted the result of the duel as their king had. Gazel's laughter subsided, but the grin on his face remained. He approached Rimuru and stretched out his armored hand towards Rimuru. "Through this battle, I have seen the kind of being you are, Rimuru," Gazel said, "and I can say with certainty that you are not a malicious creature. I look forward to what relations between our two nations may bring." Rimuru could not help the grin that made its way onto his face as his hand met Gazel's in a firm handshake. "So do I, King Gazel," he responded. "But before we get into all that, I suppose the two of us have much to talk about. Now that we have displayed our strength, allow us to show you Tempest's hospitality." "Ha ha ha ha. Very well then, Rimuru, lead the way." Gazel's voice boomed as he let out a delighted laugh. And so, the tensions between the two armies melted away as their leaders walked into the gates of Rimuru City. While there were still details to iron out, the future between Tempest and Dworgen was looking bright. That evening, a series of individual low tables had been laid out for Gazel and the guests. Tensions seemed to have wilted down and the atmosphere seemed to be much more jovial and accepting than it had been just a few hours ago. Even Gazel, with his usually rigid and composed structure, seemed to have eased somewhat. "To think that we would share the same master, Rimuru. I should have known it to be too much of a coincidence for us to use the same swordsmanship style," Gazel said with an amused smile. "I am just as shocked as you are, to be honest. I did not think that Hakuru of all people was the one who taught you the haze style," Rimuru said. It had just come to light that Hakuru was the one who had taught Gazel the way of the sword. Centuries ago, when the Hero King was still in his youth, he had wandered into the forest and came across Hakuru, who at the time was known as the Sword Savant. One thing led to another, and Gazel became Hakuru's first disciple. It was a surprising turn of events that connected the two kings in the most unique of ways, as Gazel was technically Rimuru's senior. "Ho ho ho, it is I who should feel honored, though," Hakuru said with a smile as he caressed his beard, "to witness a battle between two of my disciples, both of whom have clearly surpassed me in the way of the sword." "Hee, your praise is too much," Gazel replied as he sheepishly rubbed the back of his head, a rare sign of embarrassment from the steadfast king. "It seems you have left behind quite the legacy, my love," Keat said from beside Hakuru, pride evident in her voice. "I do hope you have been training our daughter with the same fervor." "Of course," Hakuru said with a laugh, and Rimuru could not help but laugh at the scene. Momiji, Hakuru's daughter, was someone Rimuru had met a few times since the Tengu relocated to Rimuru City. The girl held a lot of potential, and her magicules were second only to his own. She was at least S rank and according to Keed would continue to grow with time. But she was still raw. Being 15 years of age, she still had much to learn in terms of combat and life experiences in general. According to Keed, she was not yet field ready. Rimuru accepted that and decided to leave her training to her parents. Rimuru, Gazel suddenly called out, bringing his attention to the Hero King. Now that all the pleasantries are out of the way, I believe we should get to business. Rimuru nodded his head in understanding. Very well then. You have questions. Please feel free to ask them. All right. First things first, the orc invasion. I have heard the details from my own spies, but I want to hear it from you, Gazel said. From what I heard, the orcs had an advantage in the war, but the tide was suddenly turned by the timely arrival of a Majin. Is it safe to assume that Majin was you? Yes, the monsters of Jura united to stand against the invading orcs. But my own intervention was not until much later into the battle. Rimuru explained with a frown, a part of him still regretting not being there since the beginning. But there was nothing he could do about that now. All he could do was hold his head high and make sure no such calamity struck his people again. I fought and defeated the orc disaster, as well as the Majin that orchestrated the events of the orc invasion. Rimuru then went on to tell Gazel about how the orcs and even a few races in Jura had been manipulated by Gelmud, who was a servant of Demon Lord Clayman, as well as the details he had learned from Gelmud about the Demon Lord puppet scheme. I see. It seems you have a hard road ahead of you, Rimuru, Gazel said, to which Rimuru nodded his head. It is most likely the Demon Lords were watching the events, and now your nation is on their radar. I am aware, we have been taking measures to strengthen ourselves as well, Rimuru said firmly. He had known from the start that establishing a peaceful nation of monsters was something that could not be done without strength. In this world, peace is a luxury afforded by the strong. Good. In that case, I would like to propose a treaty. Long ago, we spoke of forming an alliance when you established the foundation of your nation. And now that day has come, Gazel said with a small smile. For Rimuru and the Jura Tempest Federation, this was a big moment. Their first alliance with another nation. Looking at his subordinates, he noticed they had all quieted down and were listening in on the conversation. He turned back to Gazel. I know I asked you this before, but that was then and this is now, Rimuru said. Are you sure you want to align Dworgen with a nation of monsters? You would be declaring to the world that you recognize us as a legitimate nation. Gazel chuckled slightly. I am sure. As things stand, you already have control over a vast majority of the Great Forest of Jura, and your rate of growth and development is a sign of your intellect and ingenuity. I have no doubt Tempest will grow to be one of the wealthiest nations in the world in time. In the long term, it is a treaty both parties can benefit from. But until such a time, you will need allies and friends you can rely on. You make a compelling argument, King Gazel. I honestly cannot see any reason to refuse, Rimuru said with a grin. Very well, we accept your offer. Excellent, Gazel said as the grin on his face widened. He brought his hand down on Rimuru's shoulder in a powerful, hearty clap. The force was enough to make Rimuru flinch slightly, but he stood firm. The Hero King then raised his ornate cup. Then let us drink to a long and prosperous alliance between our peoples. Rimuru raised his own cup, his emerald eyes catching in the light as they met Gazel's. And to our shared future. With the click of their two cups, numerous cheers and congratulatory applause rang throughout the room. The atmosphere returned once more to one of drinking and feasting. Later on that night, Rimuru and Gazel would iron out the details of the treaty and reach a mutually beneficial agreement. Tempest was still a relatively new nation, and thus had very little bargaining ground against a well-established nation like Dworgen. But fortunately, Gazel was willing to look at the long term of their arrangement. First, non-aggression and mutual aid. Both nations would agree to aid each other against external forces. Conversely, should a dispute arise between the two nations, they would resolve it through diplomatic means, never raising a blade against one another. Second, Economic trade and partnership. The construction of a trade route connecting both nations was agreed upon, allowing for the exchange of goods between them and fostering relations between their people. Third, technology and cultural exchange. Both countries agreed to a free exchange of non-military technology and knowledge. Dworgen would also dispatch its scholars to aid in the education and development of Tempest. Fourth, intelligence sharing. Both nations would agree to share any vital information that could destabilize their regions. These were the terms that Gazel and Rimuru had reached by the end. The terms were extremely generous to a fledgling nation like Tempest, and would bolster its growth by leaps and miles. For Dworgen, the terms were not as generous at first, but the long-term gain more than outweighed the immediate gains. The official document of their agreement would be signed on another day, but for now, both rulers were content to put their faith in one another. The next morning, as the sun rose over the waking and buzzing city, the Pegasus Knights were gathered at the door once more, their silver armor gleaming as they prepared for their departure. Rimuru and Gazel stood opposite each other, shaking hands as they bid farewell. "Till next we meet, Chancellor Rimuru," Gazel said with a grin. "Safe travels, King Gazel." Rimuru responded with a grin of his own, a newfound sense of camaraderie between them. With that, Gazel turned around and mounted his winged steed. He gave one last nod to Rimuru before turning away. With a loud cry from Dorf, 500 pairs of wings began to beat as one. The Pegasus Knights began ascending into the sky, a silver river flowing back towards the mountains of Dworgen. Rimuru stood at the gates, watching, until the last speck of silver was gone from the clear blue skies. Turning around, he saw his subordinates waiting in anticipation. Rimuru could not help the small smile that made its way onto his face. "That is right. This is just the first step in paving our future," Rimuru thought to himself as he walked forward. There was still much to do, and many challenges awaiting them, but they would meet and clear those trials without fail. 2 days later, "Greetings, Rimuru. I have returned," Gazel declared with a wide grin, and Rimuru could not help but sweat drop slightly at that. "Clearly, but what brings you back so soon?" Rimuru asked. Surely the king of a large nation such as Dworgen had better things to do than making back and forth trips between two locations so far apart from one another. "Ah, to bring you a gift, of course. Last time, I was on the receiving end of your goodwill and faith. Allow me to return the favor," Gazel said confidently. Rimuru could only assume he was talking about the time he had gifted Gazel some magisteel and full potions back in Dworgen. Given how long ago that was, and their recent treaty, Rimuru did not feel like a gift was necessary. But it would be rude to turn him down after he made the effort to deliver it personally. "Oh? What is it?" Rimuru asked, curious as to what kind of gift would warrant the Dwarf King's personal delivery. Gazel turned to Dorf and Vaughn, giving a subtle nod. Dorf turned to the soldiers and raised his hand. 2 soldiers quickly approached, carrying something. The object was tossed on the ground in front of Rimuru, a pained grunt coming from it, and the cloth unraveled to reveal the disoriented face of none other than Vesta, the minister who had caused unnecessary trouble for Rimuru, Kaijin, and the dwarf brothers during his visit in Tempest. "Hey, wait, isn't that Vesta?" Kaijin, who had accompanied Rimuru when word of Gazel's arrival reached him, asked in shock as he leaned forward. "King Gazel, what is this?" Rimuru did not particularly harbor any negative feelings for Vesta, but he had left a rather poor impression on Rimuru after what happened. What on earth made Gazel think this would be the kind of gift he would accept? Vesta is a talented individual with immense knowledge and potential. But after what happened in Dworgen, I cannot afford to have him continue serving me, Gazel said with a frustrated sigh. Having him sit idle would be a waste of his talent and potential, which is why I brought him here. To work for you, I am sure you could put his talents to good use. If not, feel free to do whatever you please with him. But King Gazel, don't you realize this means all of Vesta's knowledge will now belong to Tempest? Kaijin asked in shock, and Rimuru nodded in agreement. If Vesta was as talented as Gazel claimed, then wasn't it dangerous to send him to share his knowledge and experience with Tempest? Those are some bold words from someone who left Dworgen Gazel shot back, causing Kaijin to make a stifled sound in response to being called out so blatantly. Besides, that should not matter since we are now allies. Whatever benefits come from having Vesta work for you will only benefit us in the long term. It was a masterful act. Rather than discarding a useful asset like Vesta, he was entrusting him to an ally from whom he would still stand to benefit from Vesta's knowledge. And given the change in environment, there was a lot Vesta could learn from his time in Tempest. Besides, they had already planned for Dworgen to send other scholars to help teach the monsters in the various towns of Tempest, as well as improve the education of the monsters all around. Vesta! The sudden booming shout from Gazel snapped Rimuru's attention back. Vesta, who had begun to stir from his state, swiftly sat up at the voice of his king. "Why, yes, my lord," Vesta stammered, his voice and tone a far cry from the cunning and manipulative minister he had been in Dworgen. "From this moment on, you have been exiled from the nation of Dworgen, and are forbidden from calling yourself its citizen," Gazel declared firmly as Vesta's eyes widened in shock and distraught. "Make the most of this second chance. Use your talent and skills to lead an honest and straight life here, as a citizen of the Rimuru Tempest Federation." Vesta leaned forward on his hands and knees, tears streaming from his eyes. He was well aware he was being let off easy. He had betrayed the king's trust and attempted to deceive him. Death or a lifetime of imprisonment was the most fitting punishment. But even though it meant being banished from his home and forsaking everything he knew, he was being given a second chance to atone and live a worthwhile life. "Yes, sir," Vesta cried out, still facing down, as he could not bring himself to face his king in his pathetic state. This time I will live up to your expectations of me, even if it is not under your service." Vesta then turned to face Rimuru and Kaijin while still on his hands and knees. "Lord Rimuru, Kaijin, I am really, truly sorry for the trouble I caused the two of you back then. If you would allow it, I would be honored to serve you and dedicate my talents towards the growth and developments of the Rimuru Tempest Federation," he said as he prostrated himself in front of them. Rimuru frowned slightly as he watched him. It was clear that the man had drastically transformed since their last encounter, and Rimuru could feel the sincerity of his apology through envious desire. Still, he could not quite help but hold some reservations. "Rimuru, I know your first impression of him wasn't great, but Vesta was a great man before he let his power and wealth consume him," Kaijin said as he stepped forward, Vesta raising his head in shock at Kaijin defending him. "I honestly think he has learned his lesson. Give him a chance and I guarantee you won't regret it. And should anything happen, then I will take full responsibility for it." Rimuru was honestly more surprised by Kaijin's tolerance level. Vesta had been the reason his life was more or less ruined, and in the end, he had even been banished from Dworgen as a result of Vesta's schemes. "All right," Rimuru said with a sigh before turning back to Vesta. "Kaijin and King Gazel are both vouching for you, so I will trust their judgment. While I hold no ill against you, I still don't trust you, Vesta. That is something you will have to earn through your deeds." "Yes, sir, I understand," Vesta said as he bowed his head once more. "Regardless, I am grateful for this opportunity, and I promise I will give you nothing but my best efforts." Gazel nodded his head in approval at the exchange. "Well then, this is when I take my leave," Gazel said as he turned around and began to mount his Pegasus. "Until next time, Rimuru." And with that, the Pegasus Knights and their hero king flew off into the horizon once more. 2 months later, Queendom of Fulbrosia. At the highest point of the mountains found within Fulbrosia, where the peak touched the clouds, the capital city, Jia of the Harpies, was located. Jia was a breathtaking sight, a city with structures built into the cliffs of the mountain and connected by an intricate network of bridges and walkways. Harpies could be seen soaring gracefully in the air above it. The air was cold, thin, and filled with the sound of the wind churning through the structure. At the highest point of the city, within her office was none other than the ruler of the domain and queen of the Harpies, the demon lord Sky Queen Frey. She was diligently tending to some paperwork that was on her desk, the silence in the atmosphere a testament to the discipline and grace of her people. It had been 3 months since the Orc Lord scheme had failed, and as promised, None of the demon lords had entered the forest since the confirmation of a new powerful figure within it. But naturally, they had been observing from a distance, and Frey herself was no exception to that. According to her reports, a new power was rapidly rising within the forest. Many monster tribes and species were gathering and forming villages and towns, and their growth and development was astonishing given the short time that had passed. Frey was more than certain that the Magian who defeated the orc disaster was behind this development, the same one who claimed to be the Storm Dragon's heir. Frey had not yet been able to confirm the truth of that claim. But if there was even a chance of it holding merit, then she wanted to avoid antagonizing that Magian as much as possible. Her people already had a terrible history with the other spawn of the storm dragon, Charybdis. The last thing she wanted was to make an enemy she wasn't sure she could beat. Frey was suddenly pulled from her thoughts when she heard a loud yawn coming from the room next to her office. "So she is finally awake," Frey said with a resignatory sigh, knowing that the peaceful quiet she had been enjoying just moments ago was about to vanish. A minute later, the door opened and the small figure of none other than Milim Nava, the destroyer, walked out, yawning and rubbing the sleep out of her eyes, her vibrant pink hair wild and frizzled. That was a good nap," Milim said groggily as she approached Frey's desk, before sitting down on the chair on the opposing end. "Hey Frey, do you have anything good to eat? I am hungry." "Good nap? Milim, you have been asleep for nearly 3 months now," Frey said with mild amusement as she looked at the ancient, yet childlike, demon lord. After the failed attempt of the orc invasion, Milim had been in a rather dull mood due to not being allowed to visit her new cousin. The thought of him being angry with her for her involvement had been enough to deter her from rushing towards the great forest. As a result, she chose to crash in Frey's domain, the Harpy Queen having long since resigned to the fact that her castle was the playground of a childlike demon lord. There was nothing Frey could do even if Milim caused damage. And besides, having Milim as an ally was worth it, though Frey did question it at times. Milim's bright blue eyes widened as she processed that revelation. Not at the fact that she had been asleep for 3 months. She had slept way longer than that in the past. Rather, as she processed the information, another thought came rushing to her mind, and with it, her eyes lit up with excitement and her mouth curved into a wide grin that promised nothing but trouble and headaches for Frey. Hey, 3 months is a really long time, right, Frey?" Milim asked excitedly with newfound energy, her sleepiness seeming to vanish. "That means my cousin should not be angry about that whole orc thing anymore." Frey's heart sank. She knew that look pretty well by now. That was the look Milim made when she became too excited about something and would not listen to reason. She tended to do something reckless in these moments. Still, Frey attempted to reason. "It is not that simple, Milim. He is still consolidating his power within the great forest of Jura. A sudden visit from a demon lord, especially one who had a hand in the orc invasion, could be seen as a threat," Frey explained, hoping that she could reason with the young destroyer. "Besides, we still don't know what his disposition is. He may be intelligent, but that does not mean he is a good person. He is the son of the storm dragon, after all." "Boo! I don't care about any of that. He's my cousin, and I want to go see him," Milim shouted as she jumped onto her feet with an excited grin, Frey's words clearly not reaching her. "Velredia's presence has already vanished from the forest, which means that stupid treaty is gone. There's no reason why I can't go see my cousin." Frey opened her mouth to refute once more, but Milim was not hearing any more of it. The pink-haired destroyer spun on her heel, and with a gleeful shout, launched herself out through the balcony of Frey's office. A loud sonic boom cracked through the air a moment later as Milim's aura exploded, and she shot off like a pink comet in the direction of the great forest of Jura. Frey remained frozen for a moment as she watched Milim vanish from her sight in seconds. She had known that she could not hold Milim back forever. Sooner or later she would have left to meet her cousin. Frey had just been hoping to buy a bit more time as she and Carrion tried to gather more information on the rising power in Tempest. "That girl is going to be the death of me one day," she thought with a sigh as she leaned into her hands on her desk. There was no point in worrying about it now. Milim was gone, and whatever happened she would have to deal with it one way or another. Great Forest of Jura, Rimuru City. Rimuru found himself walking through the bustling capital of the rapidly growing nation of Tempest. It had been 2 months since Gazel visited them, and not too long after, their peace agreement had been officially signed, making Dworgen and Tempest allies. King Gazel had kept his word and sent scholars and artisans of various practices to Tempest, thus opening a larger number of opportunities for the people of Tempest. The education of monsters and demi-humans, young and old, was also going smoothly as well. Schools had been opened and a curriculum was in the process of being formally established. The city in itself had also undergone a drastic transformation in this short time. With the expertise of artisans from Dworgen and the labor force of the orcs, giant ants, and other monsters, the city had expanded rapidly. Every resident now had a roof over their heads, roads had been paved, wells and aqueducts provided sources of fresh water, and they even had flushing toilets and a sewage system. Sumayer's idea for creating a hot spring bath was also finally coming to fruition. It had taken some time, but she and Sui had managed to find a natural hot spring, and were in the process of creating a means to transfer that water to Rimuru City. The actual bath in itself was coming along quite nicely and was almost done. It was something Rimuru was looking forward to indulging in really soon. Everything seems to be coming along nicely, and the reports from the other towns report more or less similar results. Rimuru thought as he strolled through the city, heading towards the plaza. It is amazing just how much monsters can achieve in such a short span of time. Answer: this is because monsters possess greater strength, stamina, and cohesion than humans. Therefore, a fair comparison cannot be made. That much is obvious, sage, Rimuru retorted as he shook his head with a smile. Aside from physical attributes, monsters tended to communicate telepathically, meaning there was almost never any confusion and work tended to flow smoothly. Just as Rimuru was about to continue his stroll, his magic sense and ultra instinct suddenly flared. Warning! A large aura has been detected rapidly approaching your location. Extreme caution is advised. This was the first time Rimuru had heard Great Sage sound so alarmed. It instinctively put him on edge. He focused his magic sense in the direction of the aura and finally understood why. Sure enough, something was coming this way, at speeds that would far surpass any fighter jets from his past life, and calling that aura large was a massive understatement. If he had to gauge it, he would put it around the same level as Velredia, and judging by its trajectory, it was heading right for him. That is not good. That is very not good. Recognizing the danger coming to his city, Rimuru acted, flaring his own aura and taking off into the sky. He had to lead whatever that was as far away from the city and his people. He left and he quickly sent an urgent message to his subordinates. His initial assessment turned out to be right. As he moved further away from Rimuru City, the aura changed its trajectory to meet him and its speed further increased, almost as though it were intent on not letting him escape its grasp. Rimuru did not get further than a few hundred meters north, arriving at a flat plain with a few trees, before the aura caught up to him. He barely managed to jump out of the way before it crashed into the ground in front of him in a blur of light pink. The sheer force of the impact was enough to create a strong shockwave in all directions, a massive dust cloud being pushed up and blocking his view of the intruder. If this person had landed in the city with that much force, the impact alone would have destroyed a few blocks, and the shockwave. Rimuru didn't even want to think about all the damage and potential lives that could have been lost. The dust cloud was suddenly blown by another burst of aura, revealing the figure standing in a large crater. Stepping out of the crater was a young girl that appeared no older than 14 years of age. She had pink hair tied in 2 long pigtails on either side of her head and blue eyes that sparkled with excitement and interest. As far as Rimuru was concerned, the girl was barely wearing anything. Her clothes, if they could be called that, would not even classify as underwear in normal societies. But the girl in question did not even seem to care. A large grin plastered on her face as she looked at him. Wahahaha! Greetings! I am the one and only dragonoid known as Milim Nava, one of the 10 great demon lords, and bearer of the title Destroyer, Milim proudly declared as she introduced herself, her aura flaring wildly around her once more. I heard there was a new powerful Majin calling himself the son of the Storm Dragon. So I just had to come and say hello to my new cousin. Wait, what? Demon Lord? Cousin? Rimuru babbled as he tried to piece together what Milim was saying to him. Notice, to the nearest measurable degree, the Demon Lord Milim Nava's magicules are at least 7 times greater than your own. The true extent of her power has been deemed immeasurable. Direct confrontation is to be avoided at all costs. Immeasurable, huh? Rimuru repeated as he looked at the childlike individual in front of him. The power she wielded was not childlike at all. The only thing Rimuru could compare it to was that of his mother. Not even a luck-granting skill like Chosen One could make up for the massive gap in power between them. And what was that thing she mentioned about meeting her cousin? Does she mean me or someone else? Rimuru opened his mouth to ask the numerous questions that were flowing through his head. This girl did not seem evil, nor did she seem to harbor any ill will. Desire was not picking up any ill intent from her. She was just a wild bundle of childish joy and excitement, but given her power, even that could prove catastrophic. However, before he could utter a word, "How dare you threaten Lord Rimuru? Now die!" Cheyenne suddenly yelled as she descended from above. Her odachi held high as she brought it down in a heavy swing. Oh! Milim's expression of childlike glee widened as she saw the blade descending upon her, coated in a magnificent purple aura, aiming right for her head. Is it time to play? With that casual remark, Milim raised her hand, catching Cheyenne's new attack with her bare hands. The force of the attack caused the ground beneath her to give way, a crater forming around her and cracks spreading out from her position. Dust shot up from the ground once more, blocking the view of both Cheyenne and Milim. Hey, that attack was pretty strong. Milim's voice could be heard chirping happily. But you are gonna have to do a whole lot better than that if you want to hurt me, though, she shouted. With the swing of her arm, Milim tossed Cheyenne's blade, along with Cheyenne, away from her, the dust cloud around them being blown away from the sheer force of her casual swing. Cheyenne rolled on the ground a few times before lodging her blade into the ground and coming to a grinding halt. Cheyenne! Just as Rimuru was about to order her to stand down, a pit forming in his stomach, he felt a shift in the ground beneath him. He leaned to the left just as Ranga leapt out of his shadow and attempted to grab him with his jaws, avoiding him. Master, we must take this opportunity to flee, the giant wolf shouted as he approached Rimuru and lowered himself for Rimuru to climb onto his back. Oh, more playmates? Rimuru turned and was surprised to see that Sui and Benimaru had entered the fray and were standing between him and Milim. Multiple sticky steel threads erupted from the ground around Milim before converging around her and entangling her. But even as they did, Rimuru saw no concern or fear in her eyes. If anything, Milim looked fascinated by it all as the threads cocooned her, wrapping around her whole body. You may be a demon lord, but even you cannot escape from this unscathed, Sui said confidently as Benimaru stepped forward, a black flame lighting up in the palm of his right hand. We will buy whatever time we can for Lord Rimuru. Hell flare! Benimaru yelled as he launched his own ultimate attack. The small flame made contact with the cocoon and detonated with an explosive force. Hopefully that did some damage. That hope was quashed almost as soon as those words left his mouth. Wahahaha! Milim's laughter could be heard from within the black flames. As the flames died out, Milim was revealed to be completely unharmed. Not even her clothes had been singed by Benimaru's flames. That was great. That attack might have worked on a different demon lord, but not me. You will need to do better than that. Wahahaha! Her aura exploded in that moment, snuffing out the surrounding flames and those that were clinging to her body. The sheer force of her aura pushed Benimaru and Sui back, the two of them actively shielding themselves from the oppressive aura she was leaking. That's enough. Rimuru's shout was enough to snuff out the tension that had been building. My lord, she is too dangerous, you should flee. Benimaru tried to reason as he stood back up and drew his blade against Milim. Stand down, Benimaru. Demon Lord Milim did not come here to fight. Rimuru said as he stepped forward past Benimaru and the others, until he stood in front of Milim. Demon Lord Milim, you said you came here to investigate the son of the storm dragon. That would be me. My name is Rimuru Tempest. Wah! So you are him, you're my cousin. I saw you on Gelmute's crystal ball when you fought the orc disaster. Milim expressed her excitement at the prospect of meeting her cousin. In the blink of an eye, she covered the distance between her and Rimuru, before starting to circle him as she inspected him from head to toe. Though you look smaller than I thought you would be. We are more or less the same height, Rimuru wanted to retort, but he was trying to de-escalate the situation, not antagonize her. Besides, there were far more pressing matters. I am afraid I am a bit lost on the whole cousin thing. Can you explain? Waha! That's really simple. My father was the first true dragon, Veldanava, the Star Dragon King, and Velredia, the Storm Dragon, was the youngest of his sisters. That makes us family, cousins. Isn't that great? Milim asked as she bounced on the balls of her feet, radiating an infectious excitement like that of a child who had just received the greatest gift in the whole wide world. Rimuru remembered his mother mentioning that she was one of 4 true dragons when they spoke in the sealed cave. Of course, she never said anything about the familial relationship between them, nor that one of them had a child as well, and that said child was a demon lord. It was a rather shocking revelation, but Rimuru quickly adapted. Either way, now he was sure that Milim was not here for any ill reason. If anything, she seemed more excited at the prospect of meeting a new family member than anything else. That was probably the whole reason she had come out here. That being said, he had other questions. He remembered Gelmute mentioning Milim's name among the demon lords who orchestrated the orc invasion, and she had more or less confirmed it by admitting to having been watching him through some sort of crystal ball. Still, even he had to admit there was something reassuring about learning he had more family even in this new world. Milim seemed like an optimistic character, if slightly chaotic. I see, that is exciting. I have only lived for a little under a year, and I did not have much time with my mother, so I was not aware I had other family members out there, Rimuru said as a smile made its way onto his face. In that case, allow me to properly welcome you to my nation, the Jura Tempest Federation, Demon Lord Milim. Or, should I say, Cousin Milim? Rimuru wanted to test how far he could take the familial relation. Milim was a demon lord after all and was much, much stronger than him. But it seemed his worry was unwarranted as Milim's eyes lit up, sparkling with pure, unadulterated joy. We are family, so you can just call me Milim, and I'll call you Rimuru. Wahahaha, Milim declared, asking him to drop the formalities altogether. If you say so, Milim, Rimuru said as he internally sighed. It looked like the crisis was over. Or rather, there was never a crisis. Just an overly excited child that wanted to meet her family, and that in its own way was terrifying. Since you have come all this way, do you want to join me for lunch in my town? Food, Milim asked as her eyes sparkled. Yes, please. I have been asleep for 3 months, and I kind of left Frey's place without eating anything Milim said as she scratched her cheek with an embarrassed blush. If that is the case, then you must be starving, Rimuru said with a chuckle. He then turned towards his subordinates who had been watching the exchange with various degrees of shock, awe, and anxiety. Sui, go and inform Shuna and the others that we will be having a guest. Understood. In an instant, Sui melded into the shadows and vanished. Lord Rimuru, are you sure this is wise? Benimaru asked mentally. He was understandably still cautious of Milim despite her childlike personality. Maybe not, but she came all this way to meet me. I doubt anything good would come from turning her away, Rimuru reasoned. He genuinely believed that Milim meant no ill, and the bit about them being cousins was something he was also interested in learning more about. Remember, Benimaru, no good comes from antagonizing those far stronger than us. If we can resolve it without resorting to violence, then that is the best way to go about it. You should know that better than anyone by now. Benimaru understood what Rimuru was referring to, back during his days as an ogre when he had insulted and offended Rimuru, even drawing his blade against him. It was a choice that could have spelled ruin for his people if not for Lord Rimuru's generosity. This situation was much the same. Milim was a being with unbelievable strength, one that far surpassed even that of Rimuru's. Antagonizing her was not an option, as that would only lead to the destruction of Tempest. Understood, my lord, Benimaru relented. He would not allow himself to repeat the mistakes of the past. As Tempest's general, he did not have that kind of luxury. Humph, if you say so, Lord Rimuru. Cheyenne's reply was begrudging, the mental equivalent of a pout. A part of her was still sour about having her attack so casually brushed off. She still had a long way to go if she wanted to protect Lord Rimuru from powerful threats. The walk back to Rimuru City was a test of Rimuru's great patience. Milim was an endless bundle of joy and excitement, clinging to Rimuru's arm the entire way as she fired off one question after another in rapid succession. She questioned everything she saw as they walked through the streets. The variety of monsters, the paved roads, structured buildings, if she could fight some of his subordinates, and so forth. Rimuru did his best to answer most of her questions, trying to remain patient and understanding. One thing he did appreciate, though, was the fact that Milim had suppressed her immense aura as soon as they started making their way to town. This greatly helped in relieving the tension of Benimaru and the others, and also allowed Sui, who had returned to the city ahead of them, to get a hold on the situation and prevent a mass panic. It made him realize that despite her childish tendencies, there was a sense of maturity hidden under all that joy and excitement. One did not live so long without gaining some form of wisdom, after all. Though looking at her now, without all that oppressive power rolling off in waves, she really did seem like an overactive child. Strange as the situation was, Rimuru was also interested in getting to know Milim. If her statement held true, then she would be the first living relative outside of his mother that he had met, and that was a big deal to him. Family had always been a big deal to him in his last life. The life of a soldier and spy was often short, after all. There was no telling when you would die, and he had no intention of it being any different in this one. It was how he had been able to accept Velredia as his mother so quickly. If Milim had genuinely sought him out to connect with family, then he would also do his best to meet her halfway. Hey, Rimuru, this is a really awesome place you're building here. It's hard to believe you did all this in just 3 months, Milim said with a laugh as they approached the government building. Thanks, Milim, but it wasn't just me. This is the hard work of all the monsters you saw in town. It's only by working together, each monster doing their part, that we were able to do so much in so little time, Rimuru said with a hint of pride. He. Sounds like you care about them a lot, Milim said with a teasing grin as she poked at Rimuru's cheek. Naturally, they are my people now. Their well-being is my responsibility, Rimuru said. I mean, as a demon lord, I'm sure you have subordinates of your own, so you get it, right? I don't really have subordinates, Milim said as she shrugged her shoulders. I mean, sure, I have a domain, and there are people there that worship me and stuff. Oh, and one of them is a guy called Midray. He's strong enough that we can spar without him tapping out in one hit, Milim added casually with an excited grin. Her words caused Rimuru to sweat drop slightly. It seemed Milim did not lead her people directly, but she still had a following. The fact that one of them was strong enough to be worthy of Milim's praise was a clear indicator as to how strong this Midray was. Rimuru filed the topic of her followers away for a later time. He was interested, but he was more concerned with making Milim feel welcome rather than questioning her about her domain on their first encounter. Sounds like someone strong if he's able to hold his own against someone like you, Rimuru acknowledged truthfully. He then gestured towards the government building that now stood in front of them. Anyway, this is the government building. It's where I handle most of the city's affairs. I had my subordinates prepare lunch for us as promised, so it should be ready by now. Yay, let's eat, Milim shouted as she let go of Rimuru's arm and ran forward in excitement. Before Rimuru could hope to even stop her, Milim slammed her hands against the double doors of the building, her strength blowing them right off their hinges and right into the corridor wall behind them. Milim! Rimuru shouted in a scolding tone, before freezing for a moment when he remembered exactly who he was trying to scold. Surprisingly, Milim flinched at his tone and slowly turned back to look at him with a guilty, sheepish expression of a child caught doing wrong. "Oops, I thought it would be stronger," Milim said as she rubbed the back of her head guiltily, her eyes looking anywhere but at Rimuru. "She really is a child. At this point, I can't tell if it's an act or not," Rimuru thought to himself. Answer: based on behavioral patterns, it can be assumed this is her core personality. Despite her actual age, she has still retained her innocence and childlike character. However, do not be misled by this character. Underneath it all, she is still highly intelligent and extremely powerful. "I thought as much. Strong and smart, but a child at heart." Honestly, that was a little relieving to Rimuru. It meant Milim was the type to wear her heart on her sleeves. Like all children. If she was happy, she would show it. If she was sad or angry, you would definitely know. Her intentions would be plain and clear to see, even without a skill like envy. "Oh my, what a mess." The soft voice of Shuna suddenly cut through the tension. She emerged from the entrance looking at the scene of the destroyed doors that were splintered on the ground and embedded on the corridor walls. Her expression and tone one of distress and disappointment. "Ah, Shuna. Sorry about the doors," Rimuru said as he stepped forward between his wife and the pouting Milim. Shuna's gaze shifted from the wreckage to Rimuru, and a gentle understanding touched her lips. "Rimuru, I trust our guest had a good reason for redecorating?" Shuna asked with a smile and her eyes closed. The question in itself was light, but the underlying message was clear. Even Milim couldn't help but flinch and start sweating nervously when she saw Shuna's expression. She was all too familiar with that kind of tone and expression. It was the same kind that Frey used whenever Milim did something bad or broke something in her castle. It usually ended with her receiving long lectures about controlling her strength, being careful, or other stuff depending on her crime at the time. "Ah, about that," Rimuru responded nervously. It seems our esteemed guest got a little too excited at the prospect of food, and couldn't hold her excitement. First things first, though, some introductions. Shuna, this is Milim Nava. She's a demon lord and, more surprisingly, my cousin. Milim, this is my wife Shuna Tempest, queen of the Jura Tempest Federation. Milim puffed out her cheeks, arms crossed defensively in front of her. A honed skill after dealing with Frey so many times. "It wasn't my fault that the doors broke. I barely even touched them." If Shuna was surprised by the revelation of Rimuru and Milim's connection, then she sure as hell didn't show it. Hell, if Rimuru hadn't sensed the fluctuation in her emotions, he would have been none the wiser himself. However, Shuna's smile did not waver in the slightest at the revelation, nor at Milim's defensive antics. Instead, she walked past the splinters and wreckage towards Milim, her movements as graceful and unhurried as always, until she stood in front of the pouting demon lord. "Welcome to our nation, Lady Milim," Shuna said with a curtsy, her voice soft and proper. "Please forgive the state of our entrance. It seems it was not built to withstand the might of a being of your caliber." Milim, who had been puffing up for a rebuttal, deflated almost instantly. She had expected to be scolded, lectured, or something along those lines. She was used to Frey's stern lectures, Clayman's attempts at flattery even though he would be angry, or even Carrion's blunt anger. Shuna's calm acceptance threw her off somewhat. Yeah, it's the door's fault," she blurted, but the words no longer had any heat in them. If anything, she seemed flustered from embarrassment. Rimuru watched Shuna handle the situation like a pro, a sense of relief and admiration washing over him. "She's amazing," he couldn't help but think. "Well, that can be addressed later," Shuna said, before gesturing down the corridor. "I was told that you traveled far to speak with Rimuru. You must be hungry after such a long journey. Fortunately, lunch is just about ready." At the mention of food, Milim's eyes seemed to light up again, the broken doors seemingly forgotten. "All right, lunch. Let's go. Rimuru watched as Shuna led Milim inside, seemingly handling her boisterous personality much better than Rimuru himself. Looking back at the doors, Rimuru had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time Milim broke one of his doors, or something else for that matter. Shuna led them to a private lounge, one of many in the building, where a magnificent spread had already been laid down on a low table. The dishes were a work of culinary art. Steamed fish garnished with fragrant herbs, glistening skewers of roasted meat drizzled in sweet and spicy sauce, colorful bowls of seasoned vegetables, and a large platter of what looked like honey-glazed pastries. The aroma in the room was nothing short of divine, a complex and mouth-watering blend that made even Rimuru's stomach rumble in appreciation. They really outdid themselves this time, Rimuru mentally praised Shuna and the building's kitchen staff. Gobichi and Haruna had drastically improved in their culinary skills, learning as much as possible from Shuna and other Kijin from her village. Rimuru himself had also introduced some meals and cooking techniques from his previous life, adapting them accordingly to the resources available to this world, alongside certain elements of cuisine from the various tribes and races of Tempest and even a few cooks from Dworgen, resulting in a rapidly developing food culture for Tempest. "Whoa, Awa!" Milim said with glee and awe as she looked at the laid-out buffet, eyes sparkling as they darted from one food item to the other in anticipation, and her mouth just shy of drooling. She took a deep breath through the nose, allowing the aroma to fill her nostrils. "That smells amazing. It looks amazing, too. I bet it tastes even more amazing." She immediately took a seat, waiting eagerly for Rimuru. Rimuru couldn't help but chuckle. He had a feeling that keeping her waiting would be a bad idea. He was surprised she hadn't tossed something into her mouth already. Maybe there was some patience under all that bubbly joy after all. Joining her at the table, he took the seat that was opposite hers. Shuna took that as her cue to leave and excused herself. Rimuru wouldn't have minded if she stayed, but he agreed that his first proper chat with Milim should be a private one. "All right then, let's dig in, Milim," Rimuru said with an inviting smile as he gestured towards the food, the pink-haired demon lord barely able to hold herself back anymore. "Don't mind if I do," Milim shouted with glee as she dove right in. What followed next was less of a meal and more of a demolition of food. Rimuru watched as one portion of food after another vanished right before his eyes and was devoured by Milim in rapid succession, her hands a blur moving across the table. He had to remind her on occasion to slow down and eat properly, otherwise she wouldn't be able to actually enjoy the taste of the food. Fortunately, Rimuru had managed to secure his own plate of food. Otherwise he doubted there would have been anything left for him by the time Milim was done. "I think she's the real devourer here," Rimuru thought with amusement before speaking up. "I take it you liked our food?" he asked with an amused grin, the answer already clear. "Liked it? That was one of the best meals I've ever eaten," Milim declared giddily as she began to eat one of the pastries, letting out a groan of satisfaction at the sweet flavor of the honey coating it. "The only time I get to eat food this good is at Valpurgis, and Guy is too stingy to let me come to his place often enough just for the food," she complained. Rimuru decided to shelve the questions he had for later. "Glad to hear that you like it. Our food culture is something we've been working hard on here," Rimuru said with a hint of pride as he took a pastry of his own. "Now that we've had our fill, let's get on to the reason you came here. You said that we're cousins. But what's our connection? My mother never mentioned having a family in the little time I spoke to her, though she did mention something along the lines of being one of 4 true dragons of this world." Milim paused mid-chew, glancing towards Rimuru before swallowing the pastry in her mouth with an audible gulp. "Oh, that. Well, it's like this. My dad was the Star Dragon King Veldanava, the oldest and strongest of the true dragons, and he had 3 younger sisters, the Frost Dragon Velzard, the Scorch Dragon Velgrind, and the Storm Dragon Velridia. That makes Velridia one of my aunties, which also makes us cousins." "I see. I guess we really are family," Rimuru said with a small smile, to which Milim nodded her head rapidly. Now there was no doubting it. Milim was of true dragon lineage just like himself. However, there was something else that she said that had caught his attention. "Milim, you said your father was the Star Dragon King. What did you mean by that?" The mood in the room plummeted almost immediately, Milim's expression shifting to one of discomfort and becoming somber. It seemed out of place for someone who had been so boisterous and loud since arriving. "I don't know," Milim responded, her voice a quiet whisper filled with vulnerability. I don't really remember him well. Aunt Velzard said something bad happened that caused both Mom and Dad to die. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Rimuru apologized as he realized he had unintentionally stepped on a very sensitive topic. It's fine, Milim quickly replied, her eyes and smile brightening once more. But Rimuru could still see the depth of grief hidden behind it. It was a really long time ago anyway. Rimuru wasn't buying it, though. It was clearly a touchy subject, and one that bothered her deeply. Though thankfully, it didn't seem to affect her daily life much. Still, knowing that one of the 4 true dragons of this world was dead brought about more questions. From what he had learned, truly killing true dragons was impossible. But Milim's response and behavior clearly indicated that her father, the eldest and strongest of the true dragons, did not return upon his supposed death. It certainly raised questions, and made Rimuru wonder if his mother would have met a similar fate had he not absorbed her into his stomach. Well, there was no point in having such thoughts now. All right, on another note, you mentioned that you first saw me through Gelmute's crystal ball when I was fighting the orc disaster. I guess that means you, Clayman, and the other demon lords were watching the events of the war. Rimuru asked as Milim suddenly tensed up, sweating nervously and her eyes looking anywhere but at Rimuru. Well, you know. I got bored, and Clayman's plan seemed interesting and a great way to pass the time, Milim said with a nervous laugh as she picked up another pastry and stuffed it into her mouth. Besides, back then I didn't know I had a cousin in the forest. If I had known, then I definitely wouldn't have gone with Clayman's plan. Not to mention you're pretty strong, too. You beat the orc disaster easily. So this was just a means for her to pass the time, huh? Clayman probably wanted to garner her support for his schemes. Rimuru thought with a deadpan expression. What about the others? From what Gelmute said, the demon lords Carrion and Frey were also involved. Sorry, but I can't share information about the other demon lords. It's part of a non-aggression pact that we all have with each other. Milim said firmly as she raised her hand and held out her palm in front of Rimuru. Though, they were very angry with Clayman when you appeared, and they seemed concerned about having made an enemy out of you. So they're, at the very least, wary of me, Rimuru realized. One of the major concerns he had handled since the founding of his nation was a potential attack from the neighboring demon lords. At the moment, Tempest was in a state of consolidation. While many species of the forest had already joined the Federation, there were still hundreds more tribes and villages that hadn't fully accepted Tempest's rule of Jura, with some being reluctant to believe Rimuru's claim of being the Storm Dragon's heir. Naturally, a few skirmishes were occurring as a result. Monsters who believed they could overthrow Rimuru, or those who simply wanted to steal from him. Rimuru had made sure to inform his people to avoid using lethal force unless necessary. The way of monsters may be survival of the fittest, but Rimuru would rather avoid needless slaughter where he could. Either way, now was not the time for another conflict. So the news that the other demon lords were at least wary of him was a relief. It meant they had some time to properly build and structure themselves. I see, that's good to know. It's not like I'm looking to make enemies out of them, either, Rimuru said as he leaned back into his seat. Hey Rimuru, I just had an idea. What do you think about becoming a demon lord yourself? We get to fight lots of strong people all the time, Milim asked with a bright expression, her eyes glowing an eerie blue as she fixed her gaze on Rimuru for a moment. Rimuru could almost feel the invasive analysis on his person through ultra instinct, and instinctively tried to block it. Notice. Attempt to block analysis has failed. Of course it did. Rimuru wasn't even surprised. The gap between him and Milim was just that big. You're already pretty strong, and you have tons of powerful skills as well. I'd say you're probably stronger than Clayman, maybe even Frey and Carrion, but those two will probably have you beat in experience. Milim went on, making Rimuru wonder about the depth of her analytical ability. She just saw through my strength and skills with a glance. I should be glad she's not an enemy, Rimuru thought as he shook his head sideways. The offer is tempting, but I'll have to put a pin in it for now. Right now, I'm more focused on building my nation and making sure we're ready for any trouble that comes our way. Milim pouted at Rimuru's response. The thought of having her cousin in the Demon Lord's council with her was an appealing idea, but she also understood why he was against it. Still, he hadn't said no, meaning there was a chance it could still happen. Milim's pout vanished as her face took on a contemplative expression. Her analysis of Rimuru proved that he was more than strong enough to be a Demon Lord seed, and yet the seed hadn't manifested within him. The reason was that he hadn't reached his highest pre-awakening evolutionary form. He needed to evolve into a Dragon Lord or a variant of it. He may have power that was similar to or even greater than some Dragon Lords, but he was technically a lesser species. After all, elemental dragons evolved into Dragon Lords after gaining sufficient mastery over their element and the required magicules. A scheming, triumphant grin took the place of her pout as Milim turned back to Rimuru. "Hey Rimuru, you said you're busy building your nation, right?" Milim asked, to which Rimuru nodded his head, her expression making him more than a little nervous. "Then how about I just move here with you? There's plenty of fun things and delicious food here, and none of the demon lords or human kingdoms would ever mess with me, and we'll get to hang out with each other every day." Rimuru was surprised by Milim's declaration, which only made him more nervous. On one hand, Rimuru had heard that Milim was one of the strongest demon lords, and having her would mean Rimuru likely wouldn't have to worry about external threats for a long time, if at all. On the other hand, however, Milim's personality and apparent lack of self-control in terms of behavior or her strength made her a massive wild card. If the crater she made when arriving or the broken doors of the entrance to this building were any indication, Milim could easily cause a lot of collateral damage and injuries by accident or whenever she threw a tantrum. And there was no telling how the various kingdoms or demon lords would react if they believed Tempest was under her control. Having her around would be good in the short term, but relying on her power would only cripple him and his nation in the long term. The world would only see them as being under Milim's protection, not recognizing Tempest for its own strength. "I appreciate the offer, Milim, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline," Rimuru swiftly yet carefully responded, much to Milim's surprise. "It's not that I don't want you here. You're free to visit whenever, as long as you don't cause trouble. But having you stay here would make the outside world believe that our fledgling nation is under your rule and protection. It's important to me that Tempest builds its own strength and reputation, so we aren't seen as weak." "Ah, but I really like it here. Not only can I hang out with my new cousin, but the food is so delicious here," Milim dejectedly said with a pout, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She then looked at Rimuru with a hopeful expression. "Well, how about we make a deal instead? Your subordinates could teach some of my followers how to cook delicious meals, and I could help train you to become stronger like me and have your back if anyone messes with you." Rimuru thought about the offer for a moment. He was more than aware that this was a desperate attempt for her to extend her stay here, but he had to admit the deal wasn't bad on his end, either. He was bound to learn a lot from someone as powerful and skilled as Milim, and sending some of his people over to her domain would be pretty much the same as establishing diplomatic relations with Milim's people, which was a much better alternative to people assuming Tempest was now under her influence. Still, he had to wonder why Milim was so desperate for her people to learn to cook, of all things, not that he was complaining. More importantly, he could tell that she just wanted to spend more time with him. Power and wild personality aside, Milim was a child at heart, and she apparently had a strong desire for a familial connection. Any further rejection was likely to bring out the waterworks or a full-blown tantrum, which would be catastrophic. "All right, Milim, you've got yourself a deal," Rimuru agreed with a small grin and a nod. Milim's expression instantly shifted to one of unfiltered joy, but another thought quickly came to Rimuru. "But if we're going to do this, then we need a reasonably safe and isolated space to train without worrying about damage to the surrounding area." Rimuru was already aware of his own destructive strength, and Milim's own was at least several times greater. He at least wanted to ensure they didn't damage the forest's ecosystem just for the sake of training. Trainee would never let him hear the end of it if he did. Milim took on a thoughtful expression as she considered what he had just said. After a moment of thought, her eyes lit up as an idea suddenly came to mind. "Aha! I got it. I know the perfect place to train without having to worry about causing any damage whatsoever, Milim said in excitement as she leaned forward and slammed her hands on the table. Come on, let's go. Before Rimuru could even question where or what Milim was talking about, he was suddenly airborne, held firmly by the back of his coat in Milim's iron grip. Wait, Milim. Hold on. His protests were lost to the wind as Milim, with a loud woo-hoo, smashed right through the room's windows. Glass and stone alike exploded outward as she shot into the sky in a burst of explosive speed, dragging a bewildered Rimuru with her. Knowing he was powerless to stop whatever was happening, Rimuru decided to send a message to his wife. Shuna, it seems Milim's taking me somewhere. I should be back later today. Hopefully. And also, sorry about the window.